Yeah.
Glen Grant worked as a defense and reform expert in Ukraine, working for the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. He is also a senior fellow in the UK Institute for Statecraft on Building Integrity Initiative, Countering Russian Influence. Glen graduated from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the Junior Staff Course Westminster, and the Joint Staff Defence College at the Royal Naval College of Greenwich. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Before we get in, a quick thank you to everyone who supports the channel, especially through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee. It's never been more important to help keep this work going, and especially thank you to those who've helped reach the target that we had for our campaign to buy 4x4 trucks and get them shipped over and refitted in Ukraine. It's quite likely we'll be driving those over as we did last time in January. Thank you to everyone who's done that. We will keep the campaign going to see if we can get more than the target one truck, see if we can sort of get two before we close out, which would be a major achievement. And thank you to everyone who's been supporting our events, helping to finance those. You'll have seen that another event is now taking place in London. It's doing well. It's got about 10,000 views on the channel. And of course, we are planning more events in Berlin and again in Ukraine in May. This is the second time I've had the privilege to speak to Glen. Welcome back to the channel.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Let's start with, I think, not the sort of peace deal, because I think what the US is about to propose is pretty much a bogus peace deal, one which they know that Ukraine will have to reject, especially the condition that's been making headlines, which is the handover, the formal handover of sovereignty of Crimea, which I think will be unacceptable to Ukraine. Is fighting the least worst option rather than capitulating to the demands we're seeing coming out of the US?
That's a big question. I mean, I think, I mean, I've just come back from Kiev. I was there for 2 weeks, and I also went and visited one of the military training areas in Rivne, and I did not see any signs of weakness about the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's pretty solid everywhere. That there are one or two people who are saying a peace deal is good. They sort of, but they tend to be peddling the Russian peace lines rather than actually saying that this is the best deal for Ukraine. I've not seen anybody or heard anybody saying that what America is proposing is the best deal. In fact, it's the reverse. Everybody's saying, America is bullying us and supporting Russia, and that we've actually got to keep going because we can win this war. I mean, I've been to several businesses as well, and they're solid. We can get better. We can get better technologically, and we can get better with our drone warfare. We can improve our training for soldiers, and we can win this because what we're actually fighting against is just an unthinking mass in the main. Although the technological side of Russia, as we know, is good. It's always been good. The EW side, electronic warfare, they've not slackened on the quality of that at all. But the soldiering on the front line is appalling. I mean, it's donkeys and men on crutches.
We'll come to that in a minute because it does seem that there are sort of pockets of excellence in amongst this
Yes, yes.
this awful sort of dross of the average Russian sort of tactics and level of skill. But turning to this idea, I mean, clearly there's improvement in a whole range of things, from technology to tactics and strategic improvements in Ukrainian forces. But we seem not to have seen full mobilization. In fact, there's been a conscious effort not to fully mobilize the economy, not to fully mobilize the human resources in the way you would have seen in Britain, let's say, at the advent of the Second World War.
Yeah.
Is that approach sustainable anymore? To beat Russia, does there need to be a more substantial and conscious mobilization?
Well, I think the problem there is is manyfold, and as I've said frequently on interviews like this, nothing in Ukraine is as it seems. So when you think you've got one level of understanding, you haven't. You're probably four levels, five levels away. It's, it's unpeeling an onion, You just keep going down and down, and you don't get to the core of actually what it is that's creating a policy, because this is a policy. And this is more to do with Zelensky and Ermak, his assistant, or sometimes people say it's the other way around. It's more to do with them trying to stay in power and therefore not upsetting the electorate than it is about actually war fighting and the best deal for war fighting. And then even then within the system, you've still got the legacy of the old Soviet at the top level, and that legacy is also inside ministries who still see people as being numbers rather than actually as being, important and to be properly trained. So the training has never really taken off to the level that it could do. I mean, we're still talking about 45 days, which, anybody who's been in the army knows that, at 45 days, you're just beginning to learn to tie your shoelaces and you haven't undressed yourself properly. You're nowhere near ready to actually to go to the front line. And of course, this is causing lots of people to die early before they should do. So there's those that sort of numbers game and just give me more people and we'll win is in direct political and conceptual opposition to those people who are saying what we need is a volunteer army, and we can actually still get volunteers, and people are still volunteering and going to the front line. In fact, I met one the other day who said, no, I've got to go. It's long enough now. It's my turn, sort of thing. So these three things are in opposition. Give me numbers on one side. Don't mess up the population because I'll lose my election on the next. And then the third lot, we need a professional army. And it's sort of the arguments go around those three almost daily when you look at Facebook, and you can actually see these all coming out. And I don't see that there's an answer to these three yet. But there is a gradual realization across the army that there's got to be better training. There's got to be something better than we're doing at the moment.
And there are people in Ukraine I know personally who've been pushing for that, and very much feels like pushing a large boulder uphill. But there does seem to be some progress with that. But Ukraine, of course, is not just surviving; it's holding the line against what's thought to be one of the largest armies and most accomplished armies in the world. Of course, a little bit of overestimation, perhaps, on the part of experts on the skill level of the Russian army. But nonetheless, it's an extraordinary feat that Ukraine has held Russia at bay for 3 years and still seems to be doing so.
10 years.
10 years, sorry,
10
yes,
years.
of course. In the long one, so 11 years now, if
11
you
years, yeah.
include the full war. And of course, it's not accidental. It may not be down to, let's say, some of these inefficiencies that we've talked about and problems of training, but there's a factor here that perhaps needs more attention. And that is the role of civic society. And that, of course, is playing a huge role in the dynamism of elements of the army, isn't it? You have high-tech units, you have drone units, and a lot of the innovation taking place there owes much more to the civic sense and the civic skills of the people in those battalions than necessarily to formal army structures. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, and I think it's even I think it's even wider than you've suggested. I mean, because what's happening in the army is that the army is becoming civil society. And as each week goes by, it's more civil society. And of course, civil society is not willing to accept being a number. People who've been business leaders, who've had their own company, who've family men with, 3 kids, successful at school, do not wish to be a number. They wish to be used properly, using their brains and their intelligence. And what we've seen in Ukraine in the last year is a huge amount of absentees from units. And a large part of this absenteeism is because of the leadership. And last Monday, sorry, so only a week ago, I went to I went to Rivne training area with Olga Reshetilova, who is the new Armed Forces Ombudsman for Human Rights. And I followed her around as she was having discussions and talking to a lot of these soldiers who've been absent, but who have voluntarily come back, mainly because the government actually said, if you come back now, we won't punish you. So there is a start. But of course, they've got to go back to the front line. And actually, the stories were quite harrowing. I mean, one quite intelligent and well-spoken man was saying, well, why, I ran away. It was quite simple. My commander wanted me to go straight across a field to attack. He gave me no plan. He gave me no objective. He gave me no fallback. He gave me no resources. He just said, go and attack. He said, so the moment his back was turned, I ran away because I don't want to die for something stupid. Now, that highlights the fact that, these stupidities are still there in the system. And that's not just because of the leadership, but it's also because of the historic bureaucratic methods and systems that have not been rooted out. So, my assistant, ex-assistant Irakli, who's on the front line in Kherson, still, he's now in the brigade headquarters because he can write. He actually, his brigade commander, previous brigade commander, said there is something wrong with your battalion because nobody's died. And Irakli's reply was, well, actually, it's because we're good soldiers and we're doing our job properly. It's not because nobody's dying because, but that's the logic, you see, and there's a logic in that he must be a very good commander because lots of his soldiers have died. And I've heard this all the way through since 2014. This is the logic, and if you don't root that sort of logic out in its methodology, if you have no reporting system on officers, so that people are still choosing their friends to command. We need a brigade commander. Well, let's take him from the back, although he's got absolutely no operational service at all. And he's been doing administrative work, and he's pulled forward and made a brigade commander. Well, of course, what you're going to get in the next 3 weeks is lots of stupid commands and lots of people going absent. But there has been no linkage between the absentee figures and thinking about the leadership ability of the people of the units that are going absent. Still. And in fact, what happens is that, things go wrong and then they send in an inspector to check what's going wrong. And that inspector is going there to punish, not to improve. And these are legacy things, but you would think after 10 years that those legacy things would be removed, and they haven't. And it's because the depth of the Soviet system is so deep and is so ingrained from years and years of being with Russia, 70, 80, 90, 100, whatever you want to call it, that many people cannot actually see the illogicality of these things. They believe, like religion, that they are right, that it's okay for soldiers to be a number, and that if they run away, they're evil, and that they're on the side of Russia. Not that they actually may have a good cause because their boss is stupid.
And then, of course, dates to the Soviet Union, isn't it? I mean, these are Stalinist tactics.
Yeah.
And I guess they're thinking, well, this worked in the Second World War, meat waves, etc. And to an extent, it works for Russia now. It doesn't really work that well, but they have made incremental gains by using these tactics.
Yeah. And so, going back to your original comment about civil society, is that civil society is not accepting those. And this is, of course, creating tensions both within the army and a growing tension between civil society outside, the bloggers and the writers and the NGOs, and the government. And what's happening is that Zelensky and Ermak runs everything, selects everybody, demands what goes on. Not Zelensky. Zelensky just writes and signs the papers, but it means that they're becoming more beleaguered and they're actually pulling away from society. So, I mean, if they go to do something, I mean, they went to Kyiv after the bombing, and Zelensky was there, but there was no society there. So he's just got masses of bodyguards around him and goes up and puts a teddy bear on the, but no actual proper talking to the people that are there.
And that's a
Uh,
change, isn't it? Because a year ago he wouldn't have had that
well,
distance from
two
the
years ago,
populace.
he
Yeah.
wouldn't have. He's always had a degree of distance, but it's got worse now. Now, of course, maybe the society were all in the background, out of the camera, because cameras can lie. Um, but my understanding is from people that this growing distance is getting worse all the time.
Mm.
And then that's pushing him back to do more public relations type things inside to maintain power and less time spent on thinking about the war.
Absolutely. And training. Well, I've got two questions here. We'll come to training in a second. The other one here is, of course, in other areas of Ukrainian society where success has been achieved against the Soviet mindset, in particular journalism, they very consciously, well, basically fired the entire generation of Soviet trained journalists and just, grew a new crop, a new generation who weren't inculcated with those ideas. That, of course, can't work in something like the judiciary because it takes many more years to come up through the profession to get to the senior ranks. Nonetheless, there is still a process and a plan over a generation to replace people who've been born up in the Soviet system with a new generation with new thinking. Is there any such conscious process in the army to essentially get rid of the senior hierarchy who are still mired in this Soviet thinking? Or has the army been sort of immune from these processes we've seen in
Um,
other parts of
it,
society?
it's been immune largely, but life, just life, is actually forcing change. So, some of the better battlefield commanders are impossible to ignore, because they are the only ones who can actually get things done. So you're seeing gradually some of the older ones weeded out, but there's still there's a fight back, you could call it, by the generals' union, to maintain their colleagues. So what you're seeing is the generals that have been the most progressive, in many cases, have actually been sort of like weeded out. Um, Zaluzhny being one of those. Um, but 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 there is change, and that change is going to come. But we I'm going to say we're down to the last bits of fighting from the generals to keep their roles, to keep their money, to keep their power and influence and everything else, and maybe their legacy as well. Um, but there's no deliberate planned action of training people to actually to take over those jobs, which there has been in the judiciary, where they've actually taken people and NGOs and have created, proper training to bring in younger and brighter people. That's not happening in the army. Primarily, it's not happening. It's happening in places by default, but not by plan.
The other question then on training, because if there is inadequacy in the internal training programs, and this is a question, there's a nod to my friends who are really trying to sort of, get this stuff integrated. Is there a resistance to sort of foreign trainers and those who sort of understand NATO standards inside out coming in and helping to support this? Is there also the additional problem that those troops who do go abroad, say to Britain, to have some basics of NATO style training, is the problem there that actually our training isn't keeping up with the advances in drone and trench warfare?
This is a multifaceted problem, um, and we have not been keeping up. I mean, if you actually let's just take NATO and the NATO staff in Kiev, and they're not allowed outside of Kiev. So if they're not allowed outside of Kiev, how do they go out? Secondly, NATO standards have not been defined in a way of what is important and what is not. So if you're actually talking about NATO standards, so the part number of a 155 millimeter gun, that has certain standards. Yeah, great. If you're talking about the other NATO standards, then some people think that the tactical things that you learn are NATO standards, but they're not. They are things that should evolve through life. And the standard is how you learn the lessons and how you apply those lessons. Now that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in Ukraine, and it hasn't happened in NATO either. So NATO itself doesn't understand what NATO standards are. I mean, I was talking to a British officer who was talking about the NATO planning and operational orders system and telling me it was gold standard. But you can't use that in a counterattack when you're using drones and everything else, and soldiers on the front line who are actually surrounded. So there's got to be, we've got to go back to something like we used the quick orders process we used in the Cold War, quick orders on radio and quick orders on things. And nobody's been teaching things like this because we've been looking at war as something where we have a degree of control. So Afghanistan, we had control. We could go out, we could come back in the evening. Iraq, we could go out, we could come back in the evening. Or okay, we stay, but we're still staying in our base where we want it, and we could take casualties out by helicopter. But the front line here, you can't do that. It's messy, it's dirty, it's old style warfare in many ways, and nobody has actually got pulled this together in the training system in France, for example. For example, the last unit that went to France was trained, got French equipment, came back, went to the front line, and was immediately trashed with huge numbers of casualties. I mean, huge numbers of dead. So all that time in France was completely wasted. Lots of the equipment was destroyed because the guys had no anti-drone. They'd not been trained on drones in France. They've not been trained to use drones. They've not been trained on drone warfare, which is conceptually a totally different way of fighting from First or Second World War fighting, where you didn't have to spend your time looking up because there were, 12 drones in the air waiting to come, dive down and kill your armored vehicle. It's a totally different way of looking at it. And NATO has not caught up. It may be thinking about it, but thinking is not the same. We certainly have not understood conceptually in Britain yet, because we're just buying vehicles that, frankly, are going to get destroyed in the first weeks of any war.
And of course, we're not buying them in any scale. So
We're
that
not
that's a
buying them in
challenge, isn't it?
scale, and we're spending too much money on something that is going to get destroyed. So, we need a fundamental rethink of everything, of how we do business, because the business has changed.
And
So,
of course, something like the Strategic Defence Review is far too slow and sluggish, perhaps, to take
yeah,
account of the rapidly evolving so-called combined drone arms.
yeah. So, there's a lot more thinking needed in this game.
So, from your point of view, I know you say you're not up with the sort of latest techniques, and indeed, you need to be in some ways sort of embedded with battalions who are fighting this to really understand the evolution of this. But what's your understanding of combined drone arms and what needs to change in our military strategy, doctrines, technologies, supply chains, etc., to be able to incorporate not just, the state of technology where it is now, but the fact that this technology and the tactics to deploy it change on a weekly basis, not, every quarter, every year, whatever. Week by week, this is evolving. How can we possibly cope with this? And what are the key components of this current sort of combined drone arms as you see it?
Well, the first thing I would say is we've got to go and look at it. We can't hide away from the front line, and staying back and pretending that we can do so is false. And I mean, the only way we're going to understand it is to get involved and to actually to go and look at what people are doing closely and stay there. Now, I know that there is some of this taking place from UK, but it's got to be much more for much wider for us to understand. I mean, when During the Japanese-Russian War, 1904, 1905, we sent 26 senior officers to Japan, who then went forward to find out what was going on, so that we would not get left behind as war changed. Uh, I don't see we've sent 26 senior officers to Ukraine in the 10 years to the front line, other than the formal visits. So it is changing. And yes, some people are absolutely right that some of the equipment that we've got is going to still be functionally useful. But it won't be functionally useful unless we understand that the battlefield has changed. Yes, yesterday was it yesterday? It was yesterday. One of the generals actually told me that an FPV drone had gone from Russia had gone 33 kilometers over the forward line of the Ukrainian troops and attack something 33 kilometers. So you're looking at a battlefield width that is could be pushing towards 60 kilometers from side to side. Now, we mentally we've got a vision of 200, 300 meters with a man with his rifle, 15 with your artillery, not 60. So conceptually, that means that people might think they're okay when they come into war because they're 30 kilometers behind the front line. They're not, because they're looking at actually now getting drones that can work with either with or without guidance, because AI is actually coming in to provide guidance on its own, but with or without guidance, that can actually attack targets 50 kilometers behind the front line. Now, we're conceptually not thinking about that, and attack targets in detail, not just throwing ammunition and hitting a wide area, but coming in and zap, killing a vehicle, killing a tank. So this has got to be understood, because this affects everything. And one thing we're missing is lots and lots of very high quality technical people in the British Army, PhD engineers, IT guys. So if we haven't got them in the army, we've got to get them into the reserves. And if we haven't got them into reserves, we've got to find a method by law of actually making them officers and sergeants, whether they want to be or not.
And
Because
that's where Ukraine has had the advantage, hasn't it? Because
yes,
I say advantage in a sort of, in an appalling sense. They've been at war for 11 years. In that 11-year period, Ukraine has grown a tech sector
yes,
has become one of Europe's most, leading tech hubs, the most innovative hubs. And of course, over this extended period, not only will a lot of people with that technical experience have had cousins, brothers, sisters, friends, etc., on the front, communicated with them. Many of them themselves will have volunteered,
yeah,
in the long war.
been in and out.
Yeah,
Some of them in and out 3 times.
yeah, a unique
And
experience. Will have
but
trouble replicating.
yeah, but what is happening here that other people haven't realized is that system, those people are actually dealing direct to the units. So there is a supply chain for drones that runs through volunteers to these tech companies. It's not going through the Ministry of Defence, because the defence system is broken, not just in Ukraine, but in UK, in US. It's not fast enough. It can't deal with, I need 20 drones today because we're under attack. And those drones have got to be of a certain type. In other words, they've got to be modernized by frequency, by shape, by design, by electronic warfare. So if you can't get them modernized, when you get them to the front line, they just get shot down. So you can't use them to attack. So this modernization is taking place in brigades, who have, brigade tech teams, and in some battalions who have battalion tech teams, who actually then change the drone, update the software, and use it. And that has all taken place outside of the Ministry of Defence. And it's also taking place outside of a lot of the international support drones that are being sent. Some are being used successfully, but there are many, including quite a lot from America, that have just been sidelined because they're actually not usable. So in UK, we have to now start thinking about how do we get society involved in this in a way that we've forgotten how to do. By the way, society was completely engaged when we had the Crimean War. Society was providing stuff for the units, you know, Battle of Alma, civilian boat in with loads of stuff to actually to support everybody. We've forgotten how to do this because we've gone professional and we've actually gone, if you read my paper on this subject, and we've actually gone so professional that we've actually lost the track of being able to do something that requires wider society and wider and different systems, different structures. We're creating more professional structures when actually we need to create a different type of structure that actually deals with society reserves and small companies on a shoot. We need KPIs that say we get something from this company to our front line, wherever it is, in 48 hours,
Mm. It
not
could be,
in not in 6 months.
and something, as you say, building up this sort of civic skill and civic engagement, something like sort of, drone clubs in every
Correct.
village,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, but it's the linkage. It's no good having stuff where companies who've got these things and who are making new stuff, because we can make just as good stuff in UK as Ukraine. We can be just as clever in UK as Ukraine. But for example, is the army doing hackathons on drones with schools? And that sort of linkage. And then how do we get that to the front line in this absolutely rapid reinforcement system that is required, not the 3 month writing pages and pages. I mean, one of the problems that the Ukrainians have is that NATO standards, let's go back to NATO standards, are so comprehensive for things like drones, is that the drones are unusable by the time they get to the front line because they've got such technical shit on it that people don't want to learn it. Whereas actually all they want is the Game Boy, because that's what, something that is Game Boy is easily learnt by people. That's why Game Boy uses it. And we've got to go down the Game Boy line, not the sophisticated, clever, expensive, heavily whatever, uh, heavily NATO standardized drones,
And of
because
course,
they're not actually
countermeasures
usable.
evolve too fast for those. They become redundant
Correct.
technologically very
Correct.
quickly.
Correct. But also, I mean, it's just the expense of them is just too much. I mean, if you're actually, using, if someone's going to kill your tank with something that's only cost him 15,000 euros at most, maybe even less as time goes on, then you don't want to be spending a huge amount of money on it, on things that you're going to lose.
And of course, we talked about the Russian forces as having, broad incompetence and very, very simplistic techniques because you cannot, in the days available to train the majority of the Russian conscripts and troops, you cannot inculcate, any advanced techniques in them. But also, the sort of very vertical command structure means that you really can't do that anyway. But as ever, as it happened in the Soviet system, there do seem to be some pockets of excellence. And Russia was able to eject Ukraine from Kursk, and it has made some incremental gains in certain sectors where supposedly you have sort of elite units who've mastered electronic warfare and combined drone arms of a sort. Should we really be paying more attention to that and not assuming that the Russians are incompetent? And in Kursk, was this down to design or other issues?
Ah, I mean, in answer to your first question, yes, we should look at what the Russians are doing. And I mean, one of the things they are doing is mass. And when they make a design change, then they're very quick at producing that in mass and getting it to the front line. Because they're opening up many more factories for these things. And they obviously have got a brain that says we must make them adaptable. So, it was the Russians that came up with using fiber optic. not the Ukrainians. And now the Russians are using fiber optic, and I've heard are working towards 50 kilometers of fiber optic, which is pretty mean. Um, but Kursk was different. I mean, remember that Kursk was, you know, it was a great idea, but it wasn't well planned. So the logistics was never good. The idea of being able to supply basically a divisional attack, divisional plus attack up one road, smacks a bit of history, and we can remember what happened when we tried to do something up one road. We've ended up with lots of people dead and several really good films. Um, but, uh, but also the Russians gradually just built up the numbers against the Ukrainians, and it was much harder to supply the required amount of drones and EW kit to the front line to keep a battle going that was becoming more complex and strong over the whole area. So in the end, they had to withdraw. We knew they were going to withdraw anyway. I think they knew they were going to withdraw, but they stayed there quite a long time and they fought well and did a lot of damage to the North Koreans, and gradually pulled back. And they are still inside over the Russian border, but how far and how many and what they're doing is open to question at the moment. But at least they're not up one long road for resupply, which was just getting hammered by drones from left, right, and center.
Yeah, yeah. So it's, yeah, the position was not ideal from the
Yeah.
start, perhaps. Um, another area. I mean, we'll end on hopefully something a little more positive. But in my recent trip to Ukraine, we started to see, and this is through Donbass area, we started to see fortifications taking place and really substantial fortifications. Now, obviously, those were not finalized. There's still a lot of work to do. Of course, I won't say where they were as well in
Mm.
particular, but quite substantial, many, many kilometers long and several lines of depth as well. It does seem there's been something of a societal scandal, actually, because these kind of
Yeah.
fortifications were supposed to happen in various areas, including Pokrovsk, much, much earlier. Is
3 years
Ukraine
ago.
finally learning these lessons in investing in this proper defense, digging in to stop Russia advancing much further?
Yeah, I mean there are lessons being learned, and partly that is that's because of change of generals. And the army commander Tripathi, who's currently working with the front line, is a much more thoughtful Western style general than many of the others. And but you're also right in that society is gradually not accepting many of the nonsenses that have gone on in the last 3 years. I mean, billions of money have been spent on giving civil companies the rights to dig these trenches, and they've been clueless. They're just putting trenches in the middle of a field, unusable, and in some cases even in the wrong direction, and just a straight line, no sort of zigzags, no nothing. So this is changing, and there is obviously a growing understanding that they've got to have a proper defensive line if Russia is going to be stopped and held for a sustained period of time.
It's an extraordinary testament, I guess, to the incompetence of the Russians that against these sort of institutional mistakes, they still can't, make significant headway.
Yeah.
The last question then is related to that. What is going to hold the Russians at bay? Let's assume that this peace deal is not going to come off because, frankly, several of the clauses are deeply, I would say, unacceptable and insulting to Ukraine. In fact, European partners will likely not accept them either. What is going to hold the Russians at bay? Is it going to be these trenches and better evolution of this trench system, or essentially is it the improvements in drone warfare and the scaling up and the systematic sort of embedding of these in new sort of drone battalions that are now taking shape? And of course, the movement that's there. Again, we talked about civil society, but it seems there's this extraordinary restructuring of the army still on the periphery, but perhaps it's going to grow, and that is the ability for people to volunteer into certain battalions. So if you don't want to die under a Soviet commander doing something nonsensical, you can ask to join one of these new style drone battalions. Is it this the kind of thing that actually is going to not only save Ukraine but possibly lead to some form of victory?
I think it's a combination of all those things. I mean, the the, the spark of technological change is everywhere. That's one thing. That gradually there are realizations that things like recruiting have got to improve. In fact, I've been working with the recruiting people, even going around schools and talking with them. So there are lots of things that individually are probably not good enough. But when you put the whole thing together collectively, of all the changes, all the small changes, then I see that the Ukrainian side is getting better steadily and surely. And I think that, we may actually be on the cusp of serious change in some areas where the Ukrainian side militarily is just much, much better. The challenge, the challenge is that the Russia still has got mass. It's still every area that it can do, it throws mass. And that burns through the resources of the Ukrainian side quicker than the Ukrainian government can provide and quicker than the systems of the international community, who are still ponderous in terms of their delivery. I mean, volunteers and volunteer workers in many areas are still much, much faster than any government delivered system from anywhere. And that has got to be, in my view, that's got to be the biggest lesson that UK takes away from all this, is that government itself has to change if we're actually going to have to fight Russia in any way. Um, Ukraine is changing, and the military is changing. So fingers crossed that they can actually out-change Russia, you might say.
And these are significant challenges, which I barely get much impression there's much sort of headway there in transforming that within the UK. So this, I think, is a conversation we're going to have again and again until minds are changed and behaviours are changed and institutional structures are changed. But for today, Glenn, thank you so much for coming back on. There'll be so much in this conversation that people will not have heard in other places. And a kind of, honesty and reality there, which I think is terribly important to get across. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, not at all. Thank you. I look forward to next time.